So this video is me diving right into my design process after having a concept model approved by a client and then needing to create a set of working drawings from it. So a lot of the things that I create are just like a drawer face, but not necessarily the drawer itself, and sometimes things don't necessarily line up the way they would for construction purposes. And then when I get into the construction drawings, I have to tweak like a bunch of things that the client might not have noticed, but that you would notice in a 2D drawing set. So right here, I'm just going through and tweaking like a million little things that, again, the client would not have noticed, but the builder will. And sometimes it's like I'll just free form rough dimensions, but then I need to do them a bit more accurately when I actually get into it. So you'll see I just need to pull back a lot of those shells, readjust all those dimensions, and I have to go back and forth and back and forth. So it's really important in these cases to have things like tools like isolate rest of model or go back and forth between the X-ray mode and the isolate object. So make sure everything's in groups and components. Like this bench, for instance, I just grouped it. It was a bunch of separate groups, but it's important for me to be able to go in there and work with it. And so now I'm realizing that I just did drawer faces, but I don't actually have a drawer. So when the section cuts through with the 2D drawing, it's not going to look like anything. So I do need that showing. Part of the reason is also because there's a vent back there that I'm not addressing right now or remembering about, but I do remember about it later in this video. So to create the drawer, I just do an offset from the actual drawer face and then pull it out as you saw. And in this case, I've actually turned on seeing in the edges styles to see the axes, because it's really important when doing objects that you're using a bunch of geometry that's not just a rectangle, because sometimes things get skewed and you don't realize and it screws things up. So make sure to turn your the edges to view by axes. Like as you can see, all my verticals are blue, all my horizontals are either green or red. So I screwed something up there and then I kind of had to redo it. I realized that it was better to have as a component for the two drawers. And then now I'm going into the desk. I did the same thing. It was just drawer faces without the actual drawer itself. So I'm copying from the bench drawer and just putting it into the desk drawer. They're too big, but I'm just going to go through resizing them by copying guide points outside of this component and then pasting in place back into this as references for how to adjust them. Unbeknownst to me, I did not make these unique, so I'm actually making the bench drawers tiny right now as well. But I'll just go. You can see in the lower right-hand corner that I'm adjusting the bench ones as well, and I didn't notice that, so you'll see me fix that later. And so my drawings go to a mill worker, and they do shop drawings, so I do things as accurately as possible, but a mill worker's going to say like, oh, it's not a ½ inch, it's 3/4 of an inch and that sort of thing, but I don't really care too much. I just wanted to make sense in my construction drawings. So here at some point we were debating with the client whether to put the vent on top of the bench and then work the cushion around, but we decided to actually put it on the floor and then have a vent through the bottom. So here I'm setting things up, plan view. I've turned on my back edges so that you can see all of the hidden lines at the back or behind the faces. And sometimes turning that on helps you see what you still don't have figured out. So I spend quite a bit of time looking at the plan view in SketchUp and preparing it before taking it to layout, because it's annoying to have to go back and forth. Like here I noticed that the desk wasn't going perfectly to the wall, which it should be if it's millwork. Originally I was going to do it as a freestanding desk. And then as I go into the views, I see that it's still not necessarily at the edge there. And then here I just scale the drawer faces. I don't really worry necessarily about stretching things that way again, because the millworker needs to do things at their own accurate dimensions. So here I'm noticing that I actually need a gable at the side of this, because this is going to be an IKEA thing. So they're just going to have to get an extra gable. And the reason is because I noticed that the baseboard, if you swung the door open, it would grind into the baseboard. So we just need to offset it from the wall a little bit, but we don't want a gap. So that's why we're just putting the filler piece in. And here I'm noticing that I need to adjust the baseboard because most of the baseboard needs to be removed other than the one behind and in between the gables of the desk. So to do that, I just took the two faces of the gables of the desk and pasted them in to the baseboard component. And here I'm about to do something stupid. I'm deleting the wrong part of the baseboard, but I noticed this right about now. Undo it and then erase outside of there, because really it's that part that needs to get deleted because that's where the millwork's going against the wall. But under the desk you can see underneath, so you don't want the drywall coming straight to the floor, you want some baseboard there. And so I just have to pull it back from the wall in those areas as well. And I think at this point I'm feeling pretty good. I noticed that the door still will grind into the baseboard a bit, but I decided that I'm just going to talk to the contractor about how he wants to deal with that. And there I just make sure that the outlet can still be accessed. So now I'm taking the plan into LayOut. So I have it there, and I pretty much always try to make the plan really big and then use a layer mask instead of controlling the using the control points and moving the viewport around that way. I'm doing it here a bit, but generally I just like to, but really what I'm doing actually here is I'm moving the layer mask around rather than the viewport itself, which makes things a bit faster. And here I'm realizing I don't need the whole room. I actually just need this small section of the plan because it's just for the millwork. And I'm reusing this break point, or the break line, but it was from a different drawing, so I'm just making it a little teeny tinier so it's proportionate to this drawing. And I have a line at the corner of all my drawings just as a reference point. I have it on all of the layers in LayOut so that I have a reference point to make sure that they're all roughly in the same place. And here I'm actually exploring doing a viewport, stacking viewports, because I've never really done that before. But because I did my back edges, and back edges can only be seen in raster, but I want my line work to be crisp. I want the line work in vector. So I just went through the process of doing that. It was sped up, but that's basically what I did, or maybe I haven't done it yet. So part of that is existing millwork, so I'm not necessarily detailing that, and I've hatched it out. And then the rest is, and so it's actually here that I'm noticing that I don't feel like the raster render is good enough for the line work, because if you go close to some of those corners, it's just not very crisp and there's some gaps in corners. Yeah, that's me kind of zooming up to it, noticing. So now I decide to make an extra scene, and this scene is specifically for raster, or sorry, for vector line work. And so now I have those two viewports stacked. And I can adjust things like the line weights. And so this is me figuring out how to make the style in order for it to be transparent so that I can actually see the raster below. And so I'm just trying to get the line work to work here because I wanted the dash lines to be a specific width. It's a little hard to control, but you can get pretty close to what you want. So as I go in, I notice more and more there's just little things still in the plan that need to be adjusted. So I go in and do those. And now I think that I'm thinking about, I'm not really sure what I'm thinking about here. Just continuing dimensioning. Oh yeah, so this is, I left this part in because it's a good example of, I noticed something was off. I needed to have a reveal around this cubby, but there was something off about this. Like there was one line that was too low or too high or skewed or something. So here I am just struggling with trying to figure out, you see I have the bi-axes turned on, so I'm trying to figure out which lines are messed up. But it's taking so much work, and ideally what I should have done shortly after noticing that things were skewed was just make this thing again, because it's really just a box. And I try to cheat it, but then I realized you can't really cheat things because there's still that diagonal face through there. So I just say kind of screw it, and then at some point I just take that top face, and because the top face is perfectly flat and aligned, and I just decide to make a new box altogether. So here I'm about to do that. And it takes me much less time to do that. You see it's like just within a couple minutes instead of going back and forth and back and forth. So anytime you notice that something is screwed up with the lines, just remake it. It's annoying to remake things, but it just will end up being faster. I just create a reference point for where to put it, and then it's all good. And then I realized here that the depth of it was less than it needed to be, because it's a bookshelf, which needs to be, a book is usually around 9 inches, so you want the depth of the shelf to be around 11 inches. Anywhere from 12 to 11, but this is a specific scenario where there's actually a bookshelf that's going to go on the opposite, or the mirrored wall to it, so I wanted to make it tight. And so I was looking at my plan and reflecting whether there's anything else I need, and I realized with this desk there's no grommet hole for wires and cables to go through, so I go through doing that, and then at the same time realize that means that my drawers cannot go all the way to the back, because then you wouldn't be able to reach the cables or interfere. So I group that all so I can work with it as a unit, and then I move the drawers back. And so it can get a bit tricky. This is where it's good to select what you want and then go into X-ray mode with unisolating things around it, so that you can go back to your reference points. And so now that shows up in the 2D, and this plan seems ready, so I start dimensioning. I start putting labels on. Which, if you want to copy leaders, it's important to remember you control paste, but then when you grab it, you need to grab it by the leader itself, or else it'll start skewing it. And when you're doing these, you can control everything, the justification from the text panel. And also double click on the leader in order to adjust the text box to make it bounding, and then adjust from there. And so now I'm making a new page based on this page for one of the elevations. And so this is the new page now, and I'm deleting all the layers and leaders. I think here I'm just taking a look and thinking the dotted lines are not exactly what I want, but there's not a whole lot of control over that. So writing some notes, having the thing that I always have where I can't remember what quarter sawn and rift sawn is. I kept that in because maybe some of you can relate. Rift sawn is the higher end one, where you don't see the knots or the curves too much. So then these notes are on every page, on the layer every page, just to make sure that they show up on every page of the set. And I also adjust a few notes. The note that I'm adjusting right now is to say that when the millworker does the shop drawings, if there's anything different from what I have in my drawings, to bubble them, because when notice that sometimes a mill worker will either miss something that you have, or they will purposely change something and not tell you and hope that you don't notice. Or just change it and thinking it's the better way and not think to mention it. But that means then you're playing Where's Waldo. So here I'm in auto text and I'm changing the address, which is very important to do. Make sure you go to your auto text and make sure that the client's name and address and everything is changed. And now I want to put the renderings in, but I realize here that I don't actually have the most up-to-date renderings. I have some panoramic ones, but not any 2-point perspective. So now you're going to watch me setting up what angles I think make sense. I ideally just wanted one rendering, but because of a few elements like the bookshelf and the side of the bookshelf, you kind of need to see that from one angle, and then you also need to see the other bookshelf from the other angle, so I wanted to make sure that all other angles were covered. So I go through the process of rendering that with Vray as an extension. Just figuring out, first I thought that the bed shouldn't be in there because it's blocking too much, but then it turned out it was kind of okay. So while it rendered, I just did a few things. You'll notice that the plan looks weird because when you're rendering and you have, I think it's called safe screen on in Vray, it shows up in your viewport as well, but you can just turn that off when you're back in your layout. So this, normally on my computer, this would take about 10 to 15 minutes to render. So it's good to just have something else to do while things are set up to render. So this one's done, and it's good to click on both at the same time by dragging from the right to left. Here I didn't do that, I just did it the second time, so you get them to be the exact same size and then separate them. So here I take a look at the renderings and I see that there's some things I want to change. I'm just making Photoshop my default image editor. So I'm just finding Photoshop there, which everyone should do. I didn't realize you could do that till recently, so just opening it up directly from LayOut into Photoshop and touching a few things up. Here I noticed that I wanted that seam to show up more, and then the headboard here, the material just rendered very strange, so I'm just softening it up so no one can really see it, and then just getting in there and doing those edges that I missed. And that looks good to me. So now I go to my plan and I turn safe mode off here from Vray so that gray line goes away, because that was a Vray thing. So now I'm ready to do the elevation. So I just strip the plan of annotation and then I copy it, and I'm trying to find my elevation here. I should have them all set up, and they are. It's just that the model is actually further than it normally is because I was doing many versions, so I just have to adjust where the section cut is, figure out where exactly I want my section taken. So I figure it out there, and I'm doing something here that I don't need to do because I was just thinking it needs to be white, but I'm actually going to be doing this elevation in black and white anyway, so that didn't matter. Here's also another time where I'm noticing that not every object is actually on its proper layer. So now those shelves are showing up. And so I guess I'm happy with how it looks as an elevation. So I'm putting it into layout now. I'm selecting the scene. And what I should have done here was change the scene for both viewports. Again, because I'm kind of new to stacking. So I ended up just deleting one of the viewports, which just caused me a bit more time later because I had to recreate it. But maybe for now, so I'm just trying to align things there. And now I'm kind of remembering, oh yeah, I'm doing this black and white. What am I doing? So now I'm just setting the right raster. What am I doing? Yeah, so I just made the back edges appear there. And here's where I noticed that I did not make the drawers unique earlier, so I need to go back and fix them. Not a big deal, just make them unique now and just readjust with copying your guides from outside of those components to inside so that you know exactly where they're snapping to. And it doesn't take too long, so not much time is lost. And then that's all set. And so I'm just saving it and updating it all, and I'm also making a raster scene, or sorry, a vector scene, so that I now have stacked my viewports. So you see I had those two viewports there, and I'm just making sure that one is rendering as vector, one is rendering as raster. And there I was just turning off my profiles in my raster scene because I don't want them, if they're thicker than the vector ones, then the vector ones won't be as crisp as they should be. So now you see I'm just going in, taking a look. The cushion looks a bit weird because it's an organic object, so sometimes that comes out as weird line work. But generally it looks okay when it's zoomed out. So now I'm just updating everything. And it looks like the, so now I'm just turning on the vector line work layer. And I'm playing around with the scale of the dashes and just seeing which one looks best. Just sizing everything up properly. Then I'm copying my break line over, reusing it here. Something I'll admit to is I don't actually have a scrapbook yet. I just sort of put things off to the side of my templates and just use them from there, but I know that I really should create a scrapbook at some point. So there's my reference lines, making sure that everything, the plan and the elevations are lining up with it. I'm just making sure that it's on the layer up here on all pages. And just making sure everything's tidy. And now creating a new page so that I can do a section. And so now I'm just looking at the model thinking, where should the section be cut exactly? Should it be through the desk or should it be through the bench? Which way should it be looking? So I decide that the most critical piece of information is through the bench because there's a vent thing to address, and then also that little cubby in the on the side of the shelf. So I'm just setting that up now. But I think it's, oh yeah, so the best way to match the properties from one scene to another is by going into the scenes panel and deselecting all the things. So you just leave layer, tag visibility and styles unchecked, and then update it, and it should match the scene that you selected first. So here, just resizing so that you see the section only. Well, I guess I'm not realizing that there, and now I realize it. And making sure my break line sits there, making sure it sits in the right spot. And now I see that it's actually not cutting through the bench. I don't know why I didn't get it to cut through the bench the first time, but here I'm just adjusting that. And when I update it, you see, I guess the auto update wasn't working, so I just manually update it, and you see it now, it's cutting through the bench. So now I just make sure that I have, it looks like the vector line work is not turned on. Might be because I don't have the vector seen. And now when I looked closer at the bench, I was just thinking about how the vent is going from underneath, and what I really need to have is the bottom enclosed properly, because when the air comes out of the vent, you don't want it going through like through the drawers or through the back or anything. You just want the bench itself to be an extension of the duct. So I'm just enclosing that properly so I can note it down also in the layout. So just buzzing around here and making sure it's reflected properly in the section. And now I'm kind of playing around with the dashes, which now I'm realizing I didn't need to, because I'm actually just going to put both elevations on the same page because there's enough room and it's a bit easier to read that way for the millworker. And now I'm just sampling I'm trying to use a sampler to match the properties, but that didn't work because I think it took the vector, and yeah, I'm not really sure what happened there. In any case, I just selected auto for the line type scale. My little reference line keeps jumping around, but I just want to make sure it's always in the same spot. So now I just get dimension happy, and to do that, the easiest way is turning off the raster viewport and just dimensioning on the vector lines. And I like to do my symbols for the door swings, and not necessarily door swings on plans, but like showing whether it's a drawer or door. I like to show those symbols in layout, because if you're doing the lines in SketchUp, then there's a chance that you might accidentally make it part of the geometry, which I do not like to interfere one with the other. So there I go, dimensioning and labeling everything. I'm just making sure that all the notes about the vent going up from the bottom are there. And things about like fixed shelves here. I noticed that I was just mentioning whatever the wrong thing. But yeah, putting notes about whether shelves are fixed or not, or they're adjustable and how much they're adjustable by. And then putting in my section bubble just to show exactly where that section's going through. It's going through the bench looking that way. And I have all my title bubbles as auto text. So the auto text is to be named the same as the page. So between the arrows for auto text, it's page name. So whatever I name the page is what the bubbles end up. So sometimes I think in this one, I've just added the word east and north in front of the auto page label that says elevation or something. A little tip there you saw is just you can triple click on your arrows in your leader and then copy and paste them outside of the leader. So this is the grand finale here, where in the drawing set I just like to do 3D screenshots from the model just to give a little more information to the builder, like what the grain direction is, if things are mitered or not, and just showing it from a different angle so that they have as much information as possible. And then just tweaking a bunch of things here and there. Thanks for watching the video. I hope it was informative, and we're part of Sloped, which is SketchUp and Layout Professionals, which connect freelancers to employers. So check out our website, sloped.io, to sign up and become a member. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments.